and gentlemen, and welcome to the Central Bank. This evening, we will be privileged to hear a lecture by our good friend Keith. And the slide behind me, you may be wondering why I have the cover of Time magazine. So this image is a piece of artwork done by an artist called Nika Jones. The connection is that she also attended Bishop Anstey High School, just as Sybil Atteck. And the image of her artwork appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 2020. Pardon? Oh, yes. So the image of her artwork appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 2020. Now on Friday, I was privileged enough to attend the prize-giving ceremony of the Women in Art exhibition for 5th and 6th formers. It has been ongoing for the last 2+ decades, and kudos to the Women in Art. Now at that function, the person who was doing the MC for the evening, she said that the Women in Art organization continues to do what it does because women artists still face a lot of challenges. So, on my way back home, I wondered if it's something that we just say because we still want to say it, or if it was still really true after all these years. And, because we're seeing, artwork from a Trini girl at 23 years old appearing on the cover of Time magazine, is it really true? And what I realized in my reflection that yes, it is true. Because at the end of the day, women artists still face a choice that men don't have to face. And that is the decision in terms of raising a family or your art. And just to go back a bit, in 2011, when I was at the National Museum, we had a huge exhibition celebrating the centenary of Sybil Atteck's birth. And at that exhibition, Pat Bishop, who was alive at the time, wrote for the catalog. And I would just like to say what she said in the catalog. It's funny how little we know about women and their art. The circumstances of female life are significantly different from the demands of male living. At the heart of the difference is, of course, the business of maternity, together with its accompanying responsibility, the provision of nurture. And that was Pat Bishop in 2011. So we see, in as much as women artists have been gaining such high recognition, there's still this dilemma of choice that we face on a daily basis. And I think this and several other topics are what we're going to hear and discuss today. You may agree with me or not, and in the Q&A, we could discuss it. I would now just like to read a brief bio of our speaker. So Keith Atteck, our featured speaker today, is the eldest son of Philip and Helen Atteck. Should put on my glasses. I'm at that age now. So our featured speaker today is Keith Atteck, the eldest son of Philip and Helen Atteck, and nephew of featured artist Sybil Atteck. Keith was born in Trinidad and Tobago. Keith's family moved to Canada in 1972, where he now resides. Keith's professional career has been in engineering, project management, and records and information management. Now, Keith has turned his attention to his roots in Trinidad and to his family history in the island. He's followed his parents' footsteps in researching and writing the story of the Atteck family. Keith visited Trinidad in 2020 as part of his research. He spent some time at the National Archives, the Alma Jordan Library, and he also traveled to Rio Claro for the first time. Rio Claro is where Sybil lived her formative years and where her consciousness was formed. This Rio Claro life experience framed her initial understanding of people, culture, and environs of her nation, and which has been expressed in her artwork. Sybil became one of Trinidad and Tobago's most acclaimed artists in her lifetime, and she led the effort to shape the modern artistic movement and the symbols of her nation. Keith is here to update the Sybil Atteck biography project. For today's topic, Keith will present Sybil Atteck, A Life of Art and Influence, covering the period of the Central Bank's collection from 1955 to 1974. Welcome to stage, Keith.
Well, thank you very much, Naima, for that very nice introduction. And I thank you all for coming here this evening. And I thank the Central Bank for giving me this opportunity to come and tell you a story about Sybil Atteck. And it's been a journey for me for a couple of years now, and I want to share that journey with you so you can get a sense of my journey as well, because this journey happened during the pandemic. So you couldn't have thought of a better project to sit at home at your computer doing research than a project on someone like Sybil at this time period. So again, with the artworks, copyright's always an issue with artworks, and so I just want everyone to respect that with regard to the images that I have here today. The best efforts have been made to gather as much information as I can about Sybil and her life, and I've actually found quite a bit. And I want to present what I've assembled to you today so you get a sense of the life of Sybil Atteck and the art that she produced. Now, time is passing, memories are fading. I've even had the opportunity to speak to some of Sybil's students from Bishop Anstey, Bishop Anstey, but from St. Joseph's Convent and the other school she taught at, Francois Girls' School. And they have all relayed to me a lot of beautiful information about their experience of Miss Sybil, or Miss Atteck, as their teacher. So again, please feel free to write to me, talk to me in the future after this session, because I'm still getting a lot of stories from people, and I want to hear the stories. Because really, it's your stories that give the life to who my aunt was. She was my auntie, so therefore, I'm always going to say nice things, but I'm sure that other people will say nice things as well, and I really want to tell your stories as well. So here is Sybil. I want to give you an image of Sybil so you know what she looked like. I know it's been almost 50 years since her passing, and it so happens this is Women's History Month, so it's actually a great topic for the month to hear about Sybil. And This photograph was taken in 1970. Here's a photograph of Sybil and the family at 31 Victoria Square. And in this photograph, you'll see the names there. So I'm just over Sybil's left shoulder, the little boy over there. The other little boy is here in the audience as well, my brother Paul. And next to my brother Paul is Helen, and Helen, my mother, is here as well this evening. So along with that, you see Sybil's mother sitting down on the bench, and her Sybil's sisters, Vivian and Grace, and Olga, Grace's husband, Vernon Maloon, and Vivian's daughter, Ann Bowden. And actually, Ann Bowden I met again very recently. She's in her 70s now, and she actually provided me with a nice big box full of Sybil's information, which helped the research. So this biography project I told you started in 2018. It's been ongoing. I'm going to give you a little bit about the predictions from the past, what people were saying about great women painters, some challenges I've had with the research, and the questions that I raised. I will then start with the profile, because I'm not going to give you her full life story. I can't possibly. There's just too much information. So I've broken it up into two parts. I'm relaying on the subject of the artwork, specifically from the time period of the Central Bank collection. But I will start with a Guardian article from 1956, which I thought, how do I bring Sybil as close to you as I can, but to have somebody who spoke to Sybil and reported on her back in that time. And then I've also broken up her art into various artistic periods, and we'll look at period 8 and period 9 from 1956 to 65 in this expressionist art period, and then from 66 to 73 in a semi-abstract expressionist period. And then I'll give you some conclusions. So I started this project in 2018, And I've written a very detailed manuscript, and my cousin in Canada has told me that I probably was stalking her through her life, because every time she turned left or right, I know about it. I've got a lot of Sybil's personal files from the family collection. And like I said, my cousin also provided me a lot of things. I've found information both online and from institutions from the UK, from the United States, and other locations. Over 400 primary source documents were collected, some secondary sources. I have an art database now with Artwork Archive, which is a professional art database of over 700 of Sybil's artworks, and I'm still finding more. And even discussion this evening, people are telling me, oh, I know of another artwork of Sybil's. So they're coming out of the woodwork, and lately I've been finding a Sybil Atteck artwork, either as a new one or a better image of one that have low resolution, approximately one a month. I've identified that Sybil, in her lifetime, participated or contributed to 76 exhibitions, of which 20 were solo exhibitions and 37 were international exhibitions. And in my research, looking at the time period that Sybil was functioning as an artist in and becoming an artist, if you think about it, even an artist today would be challenged to participate in 76 exhibitions, to do 20 solo exhibitions, to do 37 international exhibitions. And yet she did this between the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. I've chronicled her life, and I've even found a lot of very interesting posthumous celebrations of her life. I've even located 17 works that she's either written herself or was interviewed and was written about her, so a direct relation for what she was saying at the time. And I've also looked at all of her teachers. So I've gone back through each educational institution where she went to study art, got the information about who was teaching at the time and who were her teachers. So I've got a good sense of who were her influencers in the artistic field through her life. And I've grouped her art into various stylistic periods, of which I'm going to relate the last two of those to you. So if I just take a quick look at the timeline of Sybil's life, she was born in 1911 in Tableland on her grandfather's cocoa estate. So she was born on a cocoa estate, essentially. The family moved to Rio Claro in 1913, and to her own father's cocoa estate. And so Sybil's memories, she was only about a year and a half old, so she had no memory of coming out of Tableland, and that's in part why she's always told people for much of her life that she was born in Rio Claro. And it wasn't until 1969 that I came across art catalogs where she corrected that and started saying Tableland. She moved to Port of Spain in 1921, and then she went to Bishop Anstey School. And unfortunately, it's a bit out of focus here. Then she got her first major job at the Ministry of Agriculture, and she joined the Field Naturalist Club, both in 1931. And we have a member of the Field Naturalist Club here. I was just talking to him, and I was relating the fact that Sybil was amongst the first cohort of women allowed to be members of the Trinidad Field Naturalist Club in June of 1931. She and her sister, Olga, were both inducted, and the person who nominated them was Andrew Carr. That name comes up again because Andrew Carr was a member of the first committee of the Trinidad Art Society. So Sybil was supposed to have participated in a Society of Trinidad Independence exhibition, and it was talked about in 1930, but since she had not actually started to work at the botanical department until 1931, the first successful exhibition of the Society of Trinidad Independence happened in 1933. So I believe that she participated in that exhibition. And then in 1935, she goes off to study art in London, England, at the London Polytechnic Institute. And then she is participating in the Trinidad Guardian exhibition in 1939. And that's the exhibition where Amy Leong Pang and Alice Pashley and others were trying to resurrect the life of the Society of Trinidad Independence, but unfortunately that did not continue. And then she goes off to Peru in 1941 to get an experience in art. So she was always trying to study art, and she tried to study art again, and she kept asking people to help her. And it wasn't until her sisters went to Peru in 1940 that they had identified that there was an art school there, and they invited Sybil to come stay with them, and that's how Sybil went to the Escuela de Bellas Artes and spent a year in Peru studying there. And then, when she returns from Peru, she's invited to participate in the malaria control unit in Trinidad. So as you know, the United States military, back in the time during the war, were trying to eradicate malaria from Trinidad. And they brought in the Rockefeller Foundation to help sponsor the work, along with the Navy and the Army and the Trinidad government. And they hired members of the Atteck family, being Sybil, Rita, and Patricia, to participate in the research they were doing at the time. And then in 1943, Sybil helps found the Trinidad Art Society. Then she goes off to Washington University very soon after the founding of the Art Society to get her study in art. And there she studies art for 3 years. Now, it's a 4-year program. And so what happened was she got 1 year given to her for the first year of art because of her year she spent at the London Polytechnic Institute, but she then had to take the rest of the other academic courses that she needed to take as well, and she worked through the summers, and so she finished a 4-year degree program in 3 years. And I actually got the transcripts from her education, and then she returns to Trinidad in 1948. She gets her first job teaching at St. Joseph's Convent for 1 term in San Fernando. She was being paid $35 a month, whereas other teachers were being paid $75 a month. And it didn't pay very well, so she didn't stay there. Then she has 3 major solo exhibitions in Port of Spain. The first is at the library here in Port of Spain, opened by the mayor, then the town hall in San Fernando, and then at the Normandy Hotel. And I found a lot of newspaper articles around that time period which talk about the quality of her art at the time. And then she gets a job in Port of Spain working at Bishop Anstey. Again, I think for a year or 2. I don't have the actual records for how long she was teaching there. Her next exhibition internationally was in Barbados in 1951. And then after that, she gets her job at St. Joseph's Convent. And there's a number of years there in between where she couldn't find work teaching. Even though when she graduated from Washington University, she said, I've got a degree in art. Can I come back to Trinidad and be one of those few people with a good education in art to start teaching? And she really struggled to find an opportunity to start teaching. So she got this opportunity at St. Joseph's Convent and started to teach the children here, or the young girls here in Port of Spain. And then in 1955, she gets her big break in the sense that her artwork, Still Life with Fruit, is included in the Royal Academy of Arts in London, England. And she was the first Trinidadian and Caribbean artist, in the British Caribbean, I'm sure, to be included in a Royal Academy of Arts exhibition in London, England. And there are interesting newspaper articles about the celebrations held here in Port of Spain and with the Art Society. And she even received a beautiful letter from the Commonwealth Institute the British Council, talking about how a significant an event it was to have a Trinidadian artist hung in the Royal Academy in London, England. In 1957, Sybil and her family members also participated in the discovery of the double Zirconia flower. You may have known of Grace Malone. Well, that's Grace Atteck, her sister. Along with family members, my father, Philip, and Clive, and Sybil, along with David O. Young, were traveling to Blanchisseuse, and on their return, they discovered the flower together. Then in 1959, Sybil has 3 international exhibitions: the Commonwealth Institute in London, the ACA Gallery in New York City, and then another third one in Jamaica at the Jamaica Institute of Jamaica, sorry. 3 major solo exhibitions internationally. And then she gets her opportunity to start working on the terracotta work at the Hilton Hotel, and she gets a job temporarily for 1 year at Holy Name Convent. And then in 1962, she's asked to participate in the development of the coat of arms, the national flag, and the selection of the national flower of Trinidad and Tobago being the Chiconia flower. She starts working at St. Francois Girls' College until 1974, when she resigns from that. She gets invited in 1969 to go to Brazil at the invitation of the government of Brazil. And then she participates in the twinning, one of the twinning trips to St. Catharines, Ontario, where she holds 2 more solo exhibitions in Canada. She receives her Chiconia Medal Gold in 1973, and then she unfortunately passed away on April the 15th, 1975. So that's the span of life of Sybil Atteck. I've also looked at all the art evolution that she had through her life, from the time she was a student, through all of her evolutionary periods from different teachers and so on, experiences, right to the end of life. And I've characterized the type of art that she had from each of these periods. I'm not saying to you that I'm an expert in art. I've been trying to do the best I can, but these characterizations are relatively easy to see once you have a large enough cohort of her artworks. The 700 that I have managed to find are part of that. So I had to break this entire lecture up into parts because I can't give you all. So I'm going to talk about her early period on Wednesday at UWI, and then the rest of the time, the last 2 periods here for the central bank is for this evening. So a prediction from the past. In 1951, in a BBC broadcast entitled Art in the Caribbean by John Harrison, he predicted that there'd be the first great West Indian artist will rise up in the Caribbean. And he didn't know who that would be at the time, but they would become one of the great artists of the world. Now, he referred to them as great West Indian artists, but I think in today's vernacular would be great Caribbean artists. At the same time in 1951, the Colombian art critic Enrique Bonaventure wrote of Sybil when he came and reviewed the November exhibition. And he spoke of Sybil as having a great technical skill and artistic maturity. And this is 1951. So we have these 2 articles, one talking about great women artists, or great artists, sorry, and then this other art critic coming up from Colombia talking about Sybil having attained such skill. And he talks about her precision and drawing skills. So basically, he is complimenting her art at this time in 1951. In 1963, Harold Simmons, who is considered the father of St. Lucian art, wrote of Sybil, saying that Sybil's works may be summed up in 2 words: a disciplined struggle. And this is an interesting characterization because, as Naima pointed out, for a woman in art at the time, trying to make a living in art, not just doing art for the sake of enjoyment in art, but making a living in art, this was a struggle. And she had to stay disciplined to her art technique to develop it over time. And this characterization came in 1963. And this is where he basically says that Sybil is one of the brightest stars in the firmament of West Indian art. In 1968, Hans Guggenheim, who was an anthropologist, came to Trinidad in actually 1964, but relayed this in his thesis. He wrote it down in the thesis, and he got this information from Carlisle Chang. And Carlisle Chang tried to sort of show an influence chart of who was influencing art at the time in Trinidad. And basically, he is saying that out of the Society of Independence comes Sybil Atteck. Now, I've found references, some sketches of Sybil that she did of Hugh Stallmeyer and Amy Leong Pang from that time period. I also have sketches of Bosco Holder from that time period. I know Bosco was involved with the Society of Independence as well as a student of art. So again, the Art Society is formed out of Sybil's she inspires the formation of the Trinidad Art Society, and that Art Society is still in existence after 80 years. He goes on to say who she influenced. She influenced Carla Chang, Bosco, Jeffrey Holder, who went on, of course, to dance and music and other things. And of course, people like Patrick Truffoun and Willie Chen, and of course, a plethora of other very prominent artists, as we know from the past period. I thought it was interesting when I saw this diagram that even Carla Chang positioned her in such a prominent role coming out of the Society of Trinidad Independence. When MP Aladdin found out about Sybil's passing, he wrote a letter to her mother. And in his letter, he mentioned that Sybil was not only the mother of visual arts of Trinidad and Tobago. And I thought that that was a very profound statement that he made at that time. Nina Squires, some of you may know as Nina Lamming, wrote of Sybil, and she said that the career of Sybil Atteck dominated the history of the development of art in Trinidad and Tobago. She wrote that in 1984. So these are people who were peers of Sybil, people who knew Sybil, who wrote about her in such terms. Marcia Pierce, in 2016, in looking at the questions raised by Nina Lachlan in 1971, saying, why are there no great women painters? Because all of the sort of great artists of the world generally are men. Cézanne, Van Gogh, and others of that nature. And she wanted to say, well, why is that? And she says, Atteck's place in Trinidad and Tobago art history is characterized by greatness, and she goes on and says what she says here. So even artists today, looking back at the time, people as prominent as Marcia Pierce are also looking at Sybil as a great artist. So my research question is, why hasn't someone taken on the challenge before me to really do the research and come up with something about Sybil and write about her? Why has that not occurred? How is it that her memory is slowly fading from time and people not knowing about Sybil? So those are the questions that I asked myself when I first started this project. How is it that that has occurred? When I went and looked on the internet, there were a couple of paintings of Sybil available on the internet. A number of articles that were written mentioned Sybil's name. And quite often when you read those articles, you see a list of artists and Sybil's name. And that's it. That's really all you know about Sybil. There are a few other articles. Jeffrey McLean has written a few very nice pieces talking a bit more about Sybil. But really, if you look out there and start looking around, and I had a number of PhD students from New York University as well as from Canada, and saying, we can't find even in the academic literature amongst the art schools in Canada, the United States, and other places, anything more about Sybil than what's written like this, where she's just one name in a bunch of men's names for the most part. So Sybil didn't keep a diary, write a memoir. She didn't produce an autobiography of any kind. When she passed away, she just left her art. That's really all there was left over. And that's what's available for us to see. I do not know, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's an institution actually doing art history research here in Trinidad. I know there are some students now, like David Cave and a few others, who are looking to do this kind of research, and I know a few have done that. But there really isn't a cohesive academic study, as far as I know, again, correct me if I'm wrong, about this. Also, I've discovered this term catalogue raisonné, and all of the major artists around the world like Cézanne, like Van Gogh and others, have these things called a catalogue raisonné, which is a complete summary of the works of the artist. So if a major institution wants to know how much to value an art or whether it's a really authentic artwork of a particular artist, they can go to a catalogue raisonné and say, okay, well, is it one of these artworks? So there really hasn't been a significant body of knowledge available in major institutions around in her country here in Trinidad or even abroad to learn about her. So the challenge for me getting started was I started with what I showed you earlier that was available online, and then I started finding in the family's information more and more information, and I started piecing together all these bits and pieces and trying to structure them chronologically through time so I get a better picture of her life. So there's a beautiful article from 1956 which really gives you a sense of Sybil's life through time. I don't know who this D.M.B. St. Aubin is, but this person interviewed Sybil and relayed Sybil's story in 1956. And it starts off, in a sense, speaking on the occasion, Sybil Atteck said that all painters needed some means to evaluate their work. Well, what was she talking about? She was talking about the fact that her artwork in 1955 was included in the Royal Academy of Arts. And she said basically that if you don't get hung in an exhibition someplace, you don't get people critiquing your art, you really don't know how others view your art and how they think of your art. So you need to have that exhibition time to really get that feedback. So even as a small child, when she first made attempts at art and sketching, she got praise, and she's talking about this to the person interviewing her. Again, she found that her life was that of, service to the arts and creative arts. And, she had to work very hard, as she's talking about here in this article. You have to work as an artist to improve your art skills and move forward. And she's relaying that here. And then she starts to talk about when all of this started. It started way back in Rio Claro. So she's basically telling us in this story that her interest in art started in Rio Claro. And that as a young girl of 11 children in the family, but back then there were still 3 boys to be born in Port of Spain, so it wasn't quite 11 just yet. Her mother, I found out in an earlier article, had an aspiration to become an artist. She lived in Aruca. She would travel by train to Port of Spain to learn to draw. But as Naima articulated earlier on, she got married and she had children, and her dream of art sort of withered with that. But her dream of art lived on in her daughter, Sybil. Actually, Olive, Olga, Sybil, Rita, and Pat were all artists at the time, but Sybil is the one we all know about, and she's the one we're speaking about today. Her ability to see things and understand things came out of the details of children learning to play with things in their hands. And so she learned that at a very early age. And of course, at the age of 12, we learned that things changed for her in her life. That's when she moved out of Rio Claro to Port of Spain, of which 4 years were then spent at school, and her favorite subject was drawing. Of course, the other thing that I learned about the family was the downturn in the cocoa economy occurred in 1921, same time as she's moving out of Rio Claro. The cocoa price started dropping, and it never recovered. And then after that, you had witch's broom disease. And all of that affected the family's finances. And from that point on, the family was struggling financially. And that impacted Sybil's life along the way, and I'll talk more about that. She talks about the fact that she got her job working at the Ministry of Agriculture, and she was doing maps, charts, diagrams, and illustrations. So to give you a sense of now the kind of work that she was doing at the time. And then in September 1943, with the aid of the British Council, she formed the Art Society. And I found that the British Council put a lot of money into the Art Society. Every year they contributed a lot. They provided an outbuilding at Whitehall to allow them to have classes. And so the British Council was a very strong supporter of the Art Society at the time, and she states that here. I also know when she resigned from her government work, was 1944. So again, these articles were very useful in helping to pin down the timeline of her life. Again, she talks about saving her small salary. In order to go off to Washington University in the United States, she needed to have the funds to go there. So she was saving her money. She was holding on to whatever she could. She was still contributing to the family's finances to help pay for her university. At university, she also had to get some support from university, which she had to pay back after she returned home. Talks about the number of applicants, the number of students that got into the school that she had to compete with in order to get in, and she studied drawing, painting, and sculpture. And it wasn't easy. It was very hard. She had been out of school for a number of years, and she had to go back to school and work really hard, and so she was very dedicated to her studies. What we learned from this, too, is that she really enjoyed art history. And the professors and the art teachers encouraged her to come back or to continue her studies, to get a master's degree and do some work on, Chinese and Oriental art. She might have chosen something else, but that was their suggestion. But I thought that was interesting because here is a young woman who is not only trying to be an artist, but she's very good at enjoying the whole area of art history, learning about how art evolved in different places in the world over time, and learning all about that. Again, her savings were exhausted. She had to repay her scholarships after she returned, so she could not continue those studies and return to Trinidad. She'd actually asked her mother for some money, and she turned her down and said, "No, I'll give you money to come home, but that's it." So coming back to Trinidad, she was hoping with a degree, she can get work. Now I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, I can get work. Comes to Trinidad and discovers that the British educational system did not respect any American universities, and they would not hire her. That was an eye-opening experience for her. She gets her job in San Fernando at $35 a month, and then she follows that up with Bishop Anstey. So all that hard work came to naught in terms of getting employment in art, in teaching art. But after 5 years of persistence, she eventually gets her job at St. Joseph Convent. And then we read about the fact that she spends a great deal of time and spare time studying the local folklore. And I know there's a lot of people at that time. Edric Connor was one of the people who was talking about the folklore of Trinidad at the time. And she and others were learning that at the time, and she had a great deal of interest. And some of the students who spoke to me actually said that that's what she was relaying to them in class. Let's do little drawings and talk about the folklore of Trinidad. And then it goes on to say where she spent Easter vacation in St. Lucia and Martinique. And I know I have many examples of her teaching and doing art in St. Lucia, Barbados, Martinique, and other islands all up the chain. So she actually was well knowledgeable of all of the art scene right up the British Caribbean and the Lesser Antilles area through her life. 54, she visited Grenada and Grenadines. I actually found one of her sketchbooks, and it's dated 1954. Bongo, Shango, Ballet, and all those kinds of dances that she was describing drawing in her sketchbook. And she had the dream of going to Italy and learning about art, and she managed to get there and take an art course in Etruscan art in 1958. So here's Sybil, again from the article. So the first artistic period, 1956 to 65, the Impressionist art period. Again, in 57, she participates in the discovery of the double Chiconia. She's out with her sister Grace in the mountains coming down from Blanchisseuse towards Arima. My father was in the car, his brother Clive was driving, and David O. Young. And they together, Grace was the first one to see the Chiconia flower petals. She wanted it because she had a flower shop and she needed flowers for the flower shop. Sybil was the one who recognized, working in the botanical department all those years, that this was something different and special. And my father knew Roy Nichols, and so with the connections there and David O. Young going back with Roy Nichols to go and collect the samples, that's how we ended up with the beautiful double Chiconia, because that plant was cut down afterwards when they went back there, and it would not have survived. And it was a single sport. So if it wasn't for that moment in time where they found the flower, we would not have what is today's national flower, the double Chiconia. And here is a photograph of the bouquet of flowers that they made from that very first discovery. In 1957, Adrian Espinay was the president of the Art Society, and he was talking about Sybil's painting. And here he talks about Sybil seems to have arrived at something. So Sybil comes back from university. She's learned all of these wonderful techniques, cubist and other things, learning from Max Beckmann, strong strokes, and so on. She has to figure out who she is as an artist, not to try and replicate some other artist's technique or type. And so her work has always been recognizable from other artists, is what he says here. And I found that too, because if you take a look at Sybil's art, once you get used to seeing her art, it's distinctly different than most other artists. And then he goes on and says that 4 of her artworks were included in the 57 exhibition. And this is one of those artworks, Banana Carriers. This particular art is actually in Mona, Jamaica. I found it in one of their books, published. I found it reported that the fact that they have these in inventory, but I've asked them and they don't seem to know where it is. I went to the library, I've asked 3 times now, and unfortunately no one has been able to find the artwork. In 1958, Sybil is still teaching at St. Joseph's Convent. She's busy painting. She did some pictures, some paintings for the British Council, and she's expecting the upcoming Commonwealth exhibition in 1959, so she's doing 45 new works. This little detail comes from my grandmother's personal diary, where she talks about what Sybil was doing at any moment in time. And Nina Squires was writing about Sybil, and in her writing, she talks about memories of her time with Sybil, and they used to gather their paints and go out sketching with their pads and canvases. They drove around the country. And in that article, she talks about an English watercolorist, Enid Davis. And if you were here in 2020 in Trinidad when I gave my other lecture, I had this photograph that I found. Now, this is a big struggle with photographs, right? You don't know when the photograph was taken, where the photograph was taken, or who else is in the photograph. So I know Sybil. I could recognize her. She's always a tall one because Sybil was 5'10", so she was quite a tall woman. Who was that woman there? So putting 2 and 2 together, I think that's the Enid Davis from Nina Squires' story. 1959, one of those 3 big international exhibitions I told you about, we have the art catalog from that exhibition. And in that exhibition catalog, she contacted Pierre-Émile Lalonde. Pierre Lalonde was in Trinidad from 1943. He had married the sister of Henry Salvatore, Rose Salvatore. And he was interned during the war in a prisoner of war camp, and he escaped and came down to Trinidad, and he eventually became the president of the Art Society for 3 terms. He was also teaching art, and that's why this Impressionist period for Sybil is that period of time when he was actually here, that Sybil was once his student. And he mentions that in the article here. We have the card of invitation for the special event for the opening of the exhibition and a beautiful poster from the exhibition as well. Sybil did not make it to London for this exhibition. Why? Because she was teaching and she couldn't get all the time off, and she had 3 major exhibitions, international exhibitions, so she couldn't go. So she wrote to the people and told them about the collection of art in her exhibition. This art collection spans 10 years. So when I'm looking, I'm saying, okay, so which artworks were included in this exhibition? Well, I have to look in the 10 previous years from this time to be able to figure out which pieces of art are likely to have been in this exhibition. So then I'm looking at the art catalog and I'm looking at the artworks, and you see there's just a list, there's no pictures. So then I'm scratching my head and saying, well, which artworks are included? Well, I'm looking at the names of the artworks, I'm looking at the pictures of the artworks that I have, and I put together what I think are the artworks that were exhibited, because again, I've got this database and I've got them all dated as best I can. Sometimes I move them around a little bit when I kind of see different things I didn't see before. And what's in red there are the items that I found in this exhibition. So I'm going to take you on a tour through Sybil's exhibition from 1959 in England. This is one of the artworks from the central bank. So again, this gives you an opportunity to say, well, when was this artwork first painted? Well, it had to have been just before this exhibition. And by the way, these are oil paintings, which is likely meaning that they were painted within at least 6 months or more before the exhibition, because oil paints take a long time to dry. She called it Trinidad dancers. She did not call it ballet dancers, because why? In England, nobody would know what ballet dancing is. So again, I'm looking at the titles and saying which one is likely to be the one that's there. Again, Trinidad Carnival. This coconut shapes is currently owned by the Hilton Hotel here in Port of Spain. Woman with red hair. Well, that one's easy to figure out, right? Red hair. Again, if it says original not found, it's because I have not found the owner of the artwork and got the high resolution from them. These pretty high resolution are just taken from the article that I found from Mona, Jamaica. So this one's in Mona, Jamaica. They still haven't come back to tell me where it is. This is the artwork that was included in the exhibition at the Royal Academy. I believe that this was Sybil's artwork, original artwork submission for her graduation. Her thesis was Understanding Cézanne. And when I look at this, I see Cézanne in the basket and the fruit, the style and everything. So I firmly believe that this was the artwork, and she exhibited this many times and had not for sale on it, over and over and over again, until later on where she eventually put it up for sale, but nobody bought it. Another artwork, this one I found, Carla Chan collection at the Alma Jordan Library, has a whole series of slides that he took in 1984 of Sybil's exhibition, or the exhibitions that the sisters had here before they left Trinidad to go to Canada. And so there's quite a number of slides. Again, the quality is as good as I can get from the slide, until I find the original. So if anybody can help me find an original artwork that I don't have yet, please help me. I need to get the image qualities up for any kind of a book or catalog. This came from a black and white photograph, again, West Indian musicians. It's a beautiful piece. I have no idea where in the world I'm going to find it. This piece was painted for sure at Washington University. It shows the easels of all the artworks at the university at the time. The concert, again, done at Washington University. Now this one you may have seen. I know that Mark Pereira, who's passed away now, unfortunately, purchased this in England and brought it to Trinidad. I don't know what he's done with it since then, but he helped provide me the high quality images, and I must thank Mark very much for all his help, because he has helped me a great deal. Every time he came across a new work of Sybil's, he contacted me and said, here are the high resolution images, the dimensions, and all the other provenance information on the artworks. This one, the boy seated, is taken from a photograph, an image from a newspaper article. And unfortunately, that's as good as I can get for now, until I find the original. But these are the kinds of things that if I find an art, the work that looks like that, how do I know it's Sybil's? Well, in a way, because the article has that artwork. And if it can be anywhere close to that, is a very good chance. If it's signed by Sybil, great. If there's markings on the back, on labels or whatever else, that's also valuable information. This came from one of those photographs that I got from my cousin of all the artworks in that box. There was a whole set of Sybil's photographs of her own artworks. That's another way of knowing that the art's from the artist, right? So if it's actually from their personal files, very good chance it's their own art. Again, if it's of a style that is similar to the way they would paint people. Now, this way of painting people you're seeing here comes directly out of her influence from her time in Peru, because she was studying with Julia Codicido, who was an indigenista painter, and she was learning a different style, because in England she learned portraiture, the standard portrait painting, classic style. And she comes back from Peru, and all of a sudden her style of the way she depicts people changes dramatically. This one was from Chen Xiao, which was a magazine, and I got a copy from. And again, Trinidad Landscape. That's the title that was in the catalog, and that's the title that's on that piece there. So I put two and two together, Trinidad Landscape, and it must be that. Another one of the photographs. This dancer, Sybil painted, well on board, very nice piece. Another one, bongo dancers. Flag wavers. I found this piece here in Port of Spain in 2020. You've seen this before. It was called Banana Lotus St. Lucia in this particular one. So now I know where the subject came from. It was from one of her trips to St. Lucia. Study of a Girl, St. Joseph's Convent. I found also a whole series of sketches that Sybil did of the students at St. Joseph's Convent. The Little House, another beautiful piece, again, only from a slide. This artwork, Seated Girl, is the artwork that went to the Caribbean Gulf exhibition in 1956. I found the newspaper article that shows the artworks of both Carl Chang and Sybil from that exhibition. And over there on the right, I have a small image in color. I found it somewhere on the internet some years ago. I've not seen it again since, and I don't know who owns the artwork. I'd love to find it. But that's the only sense of color I have for this artwork. Again, a lot of the slides, unfortunately, at that time, the fixing material for the colors didn't work all that well. And so over time, they tend to fade and change color. Another beautiful piece, a bridge over the river. And here's a piece of Althea McNish. I found a reference to this painting in a newspaper article from Barbados where Sybil exhibited in 1951 and spoke about the large hands and the long neck. And I said, well, that must be the artwork. And then I come across a photograph online of Edric Connor looking at Sybil's painting at the Commonwealth Institute in London at the time. Street corner Castries. I think Castries or St. Lucia, right? Castries, sorry. Castries, right? Sorry, thank you. Red Trees. Again, I have a title called Red Trees, and I look at this painting and I see red trees. So that's how I connected it. I don't know if I'm correct, but it's as close as I can get. But again, I'm seeing that, and then I have this list of artworks over time and saying, where does it fit in her time periods? Again, the piece that they have here at the Central Bank was exhibited in London in 1959. This particular painting, along with the next two, I found on an auction house in England. Some years ago, it went up for auction, and the pictures are still available to be seen, or were at the time available to be seen. This particular painting, the beach. Again, these titles were on those artworks on that time. They actually were included in this particular exhibition. So now I know how those artworks got to England in the first place. Okay, so looking at Fishnet's Martinique. Again, I have stories of her going to Martinique, and here's a painting of Sybil's talking about Martinique. So again, a couple of nice data points that come together is proof. The sloop. Jeffrey McLean actually shared this image with me. And then here's a picture of Sybil's two sisters, Vivian and Patricia, who were in England to represent Sybil at the exhibition there. And this is Garnet Gordon, who was the commissioner in London for the West Indies. Again, there were a whole lot of newspaper articles about Sybil's exhibition there. I think there were like 40 or 50 articles. Here's one example. Again, there were a number of newspaper articles that talk about Sybil's work at this particular exhibition. I'll just give you one example here. Again, it talks about the fact that she did this folk dances of the West Indies in 1957 at Piarco Airport. Now, I knew that she had done it at Piarco, but I couldn't figure out what year it was done in. And I got this article, and it helped me pin down the year. Again, every time I read something, I have to look into the details of what it's saying, and it's helping me to organize and structure the timeline of Sybil's life experience. She goes on from there, ACA Gallery in New York, as a solo exhibition. All I had was this catalog. The catalog does not say what exhibition house it's at. It just says One Integra Gallery. I have no idea. I Googled One Integra Gallery. Where is that? Where is that? And then I realized these artworks are exactly the same as the ones in London. And they're the same as the ones that went to Jamaica. So therefore, they were from the same time period. And she she exhibited at the ACA Gallery in 1959 as well. So therefore, it must be there. And the person introducing Sybil in this particular case was Elizabeth Greenhall. Well, who is she? She's an American who is here in Trinidad, participating with the Art Society at the time. And she is the one who wrote the story of Sybil's artworks and her life. So again, artworks that were included there, many of these are from exactly the same exhibition that I just showed you, and I won't repeat that. Jamaica Institute, right after that, goes off to Jamaica, and this one she actually travels to Jamaica for, wrote a beautiful article about Jamaican art in a local magazine in Jamaica. So she's actually been there looking around at the artists and writing about the experience of Jamaican artists. Again, she was introduced by Edna Manley into this particular exhibition. She opened it for her. Here is the catalog, and you can see this particular artwork that's on the front of the catalog. We actually have some prints of that artwork as well that she made. This is lino cut stuff, and she printed several of them, so we have a number of those with her name and written at the bottom, etc. So again, you see something like that, you say, is that really Sybil's? And then you go and you find these beautiful other pieces signed by her saying, yes, it is her work. Again, another bit of artwork. Again, we also have that particular lino cut there. Again, Edna Manley was the one who introduced her to the people of Jamaica in this exhibition. The catalog artworks, which I have identified, and I'm again trying to relay what artworks have I found. And I'm continuing. You can see that I found a lot of artworks. You can also see that I don't have a number of artworks. So again, it's a process over time, hopefully, to fill that out. Once again, this particular artwork, which again is owned by the central bank, was exhibited in Jamaica. So again, it talks about the provenance of the artwork. Where was it exhibited? When was it exhibited? And if you want to look for the date of the artwork, go to the earliest example of it being exhibited. Because I wasn't there when she painted it, so I don't exactly know when the brushes went on the artwork, right? Again, this is one of the pieces from the central bank. And these pieces are available for you to see here at the Central Bank Museum. When we go out afterwards, you can take a look at those artworks out there. Again, here's Sybil with Edna Manley, nice photograph of Sybil. You can see the banana lotus St. Lucia in the background. And I look at each one of these photographs, it actually has a little tidbit of an artwork in the corner. Again, I have to look at it very closely because it helps me identify the work that was there at the exhibition. So again, here is Sybil with Edna Manley having a conversation with the director of the Institute of Jamaica. Again, Sybil at the same artwork. Again, there's another painting in the background there. So again, detailed searching of the photographs to see which artworks were included in the exhibition. Nice articles written about Sybil, very positive articles written about her work. Again, I thought this was funny, stories in Technicolor, which is actually an apt word from the history of sort of film, right? Once again, you can see these artworks, I told you before, were probably purchased at that time because they never returned to Trinidad. They're not seen again in another exhibition afterwards. The hornblower and the banana jobbers. 1960, Sybil is elected as the vice president of the Trinidad Art Society. She's now hired as the arts and crafts coordinator for the Hilton Hotel. So the Hilton comes to Trinidad. They have the architects working on the Hilton Hotel. They're developing it. I'm not quite sure how she got the job, but she was hired as the arts and crafts coordinator. And Sybil convinced the architects and the owners to use Trinidadian artists rather than bringing art in from other parts of the world. And she made sure that they were comfortable by showing them at an art society event the quality and capability of the artists, not only to paint and to create sculpture and so on and pieces of copper work, but to deliver, to be able to deliver the art on time for the opening of the Hilton Hotel. Of course, that would be a very important facet for Conrad Hilton, who actually came down to Trinidad and participated in the opening, right? But Sybil had a choice to make. When they offered her to do those 2 terracotta pieces at the Hilton, she's working as a teacher. She's got this beautiful commission. It's 1961. What's coming up after 61? Do I continue teaching and then don't do the commission? Or do I quit my job, which I love because I fought hard to get the job in the first place? She decides to quit her job. Why? One, I think the commission was probably pretty lucrative for the time. But I think also in part because she knew the moment in time. The biggest hotel chain coming to Trinidad, and the moment in time through 1958, 59, 60, looking at the potential of independence coming, she read the tea leaves at the time very well and made the decision to do those pieces. In 1960, while she's doing all of that, she's also down at the Shell Club in San Fernando, and she's giving an exhibition down there. And we have some photographs of her exhibition. Now, these artworks, you've seen some of them before, and I want to talk about this one and a short one, the first one on the left. But these are the exhibition artworks. And here, again, a piece from the Central Bank collection, The Laborers. Where do you see it first? Okay, again, where do you see it first in exhibition is when it's likely to have been painted. If the date's not on the face of the artwork or somewhere else, it's hard to find the date otherwise. Again, another one, St. Lucia, the Piton. So again, these artworks, I try to reconstruct it. This particular artwork, I get an email from somebody saying, how did Sybil know Elaine? Huh? Okay, so because she was a friend hanging around the family back in Victoria Square, my mother was telling me about Elaine Peters. Turns out it's Hing Wan who was emailing me, a Jillian Hing Wan. Oh, I suddenly found a Hing Wan family member, which I didn't know was in Canada. But anyways, this lady, Elaine Peters, had just passed away, unfortunately. And in her house, because they were helping with dealing with the sort of the finalization of her estate, found this painting there and said, well, I think this is a Sybil Atteck painting. He said, yes, I have other pictures of this. It was from that particular exhibition. And so I found this painting just last year in Toronto. I'm finding a lot of stuff in Toronto. It's very interesting. Another interesting piece of Sybil's, again, very similar but different than the one that's here at the Central Bank. She did a number of this style of art. Faces, this was purchased by Esso to put into their corporate collection. Again, Dancer was exhibited. Flag Wavers was exhibited. Again, from the photographs, I can reconstruct the art. There was no catalog for this exhibition. Again, the laborers, you saw that being pointed to by Sybil. St. Bart's Road, again, another piece that was shown in the actual photograph, but I managed to find this artwork. My cousin happened to have this piece. This was from a slide. I saw it in the photograph, and I happened to have one of Sybil's slides of this particular still life with coconuts. And there's a melangin in there as well. Again, this one I've shown you before was included in that particular exhibition. And this, I just zoomed in on that so I know that there was this painting of the Piton. So if I ever find this painting, I know it's Sybil's, and I can then work with whoever the owner is to authenticate it, and so on. Then again in 1960, she has another exhibition, this time with Henry Salvatori. So, I mean, she's got the commission, she's doing all that work, she's in the Art Society, and she's doing all these exhibitions as well. So again, this is with Henry Salvatori as a two-person or two-man show, as they called it back then. And this particular exhibition catalog is very interesting because it actually gives you not only the name of the artwork, but where in England, which institution in England that artwork was actually exhibited. And Sybil provides that information. So the two-man show, here are the artworks. This is the first time I come across the exhibit of this Indian festival. So again, trying to date the artwork. Once again, if it's the first time it's shown, if it's not actually listed on the face of the painting or written on the back of some kind of a note, basically that's all you have to go from. Once again, the piece from the Central Bank was exhibited there as well. Again, you can see Sybil's trying to exhibit artworks to sell them and nobody's buying them. Very few people were buying her best artworks during her lifetime. Even though she sold a number of artworks, she also gave away many artworks. And this is the struggle, they call it a struggling artist. This is Sybil's experience. Derek Walcott reviews this exhibition. And what I learned from the review that Derek Walcott had, because the actual catalog didn't say where it was exhibited. Here we're talking about the French Street Art Center. Again, I'm trying to figure out when did they get the French Street Art Center. And again, I'm finding these references in the text, again, to try and date when they got that particular art center. In 1961, Sybil was the vice president of the Art Society, and later on elected as the president for her first term. So here she is, becoming the president of the Art Society after all these years of founding it. She's a participant, she is on all the committees, she's a vice president and so on, not the leader. But she then becomes president in 61, just as we're heading into the moment of time of Trinidad's independence. Okay, she gets her employment at Holy Name Convent, and she's working on the terracotta artworks for this Hilton Hotel. Okay, she goes to England to participate in another Commonwealth Institute exhibition. This time it is not her personal exhibition, it's an Art Society exhibition. Here's a beautiful picture of Sybil with her artworks in her studio at 31 Victoria Square. Another picture, again, I'm looking at these artworks and saying, I wonder where these artworks are. I'd love to find them. Again, another picture. And again, I'm looking at this picture and saying, what's the date on this picture? And when I looked over and above her head, I'm seeing the crest of the Federation of the West Indies. Well, it has to be between a certain time period, right? 58 through to 61, 62. So, and then I also find her in the same dress with family members, and I know my brother's age because he was a pretty little baby at the time. And so when you look at the youngest person in the picture, you get a better sense of the actual date of the photograph. So Sybil travels to England and represents the Art Society at another Commonwealth Institute exhibition. This time it's a group exhibition. And there is a list of the artworks at the exhibition. What is nice is they're listing all these different artists. Unfortunately, it's a bit blurred out. You can't see it very well. So here are the lists of the artworks that I found so far. And here's the artwork that I really love to see. I wish I could see it myself in person. But this particular Carney Swamp artwork is in England. It's in the, I believe, the Trinidad High Commission office in England. It's signed by Sybil. It is a beautiful work. I have photographs of her showing it off from 1961. So once again, I can pretty much date the artwork if it isn't already dated on the piece. Another piece, St. Joseph's Convent schoolgirls, or choir girls. This was purchased by Sylvia Weintraub. Sylvia Weintraub was the wife of an American financier who was living here in Trinidad, and she was very active in the Art Society. You see her name mentioned several times on committees and so on. Not necessarily in leadership, but on committees. And in one of the catalogs talks about the fact that she purchased this artwork. My question is, where in the world am I going to find the Weintraub family? Probably it's a big Jewish family somewhere in the United States. I'm hoping one day I'll find this artwork, but I know that she purchased this piece. This one I've seen around pictures of. I only have a low quality image of it, but somebody can help me find this piece, it'd be great. And then this piece came to me just about 2 months ago from a guy in the UK. Sends me an email saying, I found this artwork. It's a Sybil Atteck, I think. I don't know who she is. I bought this in a thrift store for £2 British. I know it came from that exhibition because it's listed, and on the back of the artwork is all the provenance documentation about the title of the artwork and the artist and everything else stuck to the back of the artwork. And it also fits her style. So I know exactly when it went to England, but I don't know how it got to a thrift store. Here's a beautiful picture of Sybil with her artworks as she returns from England at that time period, because she had a number of artworks with an agent who represented her in England to help put these artworks up for display in the different institutions. And she comes back in this time period and brings these artworks back. And what's interesting, on the back of the wall there, you'll see that little piece strip on the back. And I'll talk a bit more about that, but that's basically from the Hilton piece. That's the initial concept piece that she did for that. Another picture of Sybil with her brushes. Some artists, art professors were asking me, well, what were Sybil's brushes like? What kind of brushes did she use? Well, there's a number of pictures that show her with her brushes in hand. We don't have any of them left over from her estate, but they help to inform on the analysis of her art, the kinds of brushes she used, things of that nature. The Hilton terracotta pieces, again, I told you, this was the concept piece. It was sold here in Port of Spain, along with the second one, there's two of them, in 1984. To somebody here bought them. Please help me find them. Okay? Those are the concept pieces for the Hilton works. So I went, so in June 1962, there's a beautiful newspaper article that gives, again, the story of the making of these artworks. And I've written this story up into my manuscript, which I would like to get published. But it talks about the fact that she had to purchase like 2 tons of clay, right? 2 tons of clay. It talks about working with the brickworks in San Fernando, and the way that she painted it with overtones of vermilion and ochre and ivory and verdigris green, whatever that is exactly, I don't know. I'm not a color expert. And it talks about the fact that one scene depicts city and one is a town scene. So again, it gives me more information about the artworks to help write up the story of the artworks. And the fear that Sybil had when she was making these artworks. So she did not want to do terracotta. She wanted to do a painting. But the architects and the people at the Hilton said, no, we want you to do terracotta. So here she is charged with doing the biggest terracotta work she's ever done in her life. She's done small pieces before, she's done busts, but she's never done something of that scale. And the biggest fear she had was a piece of it exploding when it gets fired, right? So if there's any air bubbles in it, it'll explode. How do you replace it? Can't do it. So she was really challenged. She went off to Mexico after one of the pieces were done. The Trinidad Art Society had an exhibition in Mexico, and she went off there in one. And the second one, when it was going to be fired, she went off to Peru for pilgrimage with her sisters and cousins to get herself out of Trinidad. She couldn't stand it to see what would happen when it came back, because the commission would be spoiled completely if they exploded. I found this in an architectural magazine of the Hilton at the time, and you can see the way the light was portrayed on the artwork. It was completely different than it is today, right? It was a lot more. It was like a piece, a raised piece in the middle there, with a lot of natural light coming in the center, and then the piece was standing out by itself. And you look at it today, and this is what you see. And when you go into the Hilton, these pot lights are on the artwork, and you really can't get a good sense of it. You've got dark areas and overly light areas. How do you photograph it? So I asked them to turn the lights off, please. And then I got a scissor lift, and I went up there with my cousin who came down with me last time, and we photographed it section by section by section. 32 photographs left to right and 32 photographs right to left on each of them. Took several hours. So I want to give you a little chance to see it. This particular bulb is not all that great. It's a bit bright, but it gives you a chance to actually see the artworks probably for the first time as close up as this, because they're 12 feet in the air. And you get a sense of what's on these artworks that she did at the time. This is the City Life piece. Again, this was all assembled like a jigsaw puzzle. She was up on scaffolding, assembling this, and then adding the color to it afterwards. Of course, they shrank a bit more than she expected, so she had to add a little piece at the end, which had to be done afterwards. And one of them actually has her signature at the bottom. Now, if you go to the Hilton, there's not a single sign that I can recall seeing that tells you about the artworks, who did it, or anything. Just sitting up there with pot lights on it. But I wrote, along with my mother helping me, because she was an adult at the time, I was a child, and about doing this. I remember her giving me mallets as a child to go hit the clay. Keep me out of the way, go hit the clay to knock out the air. So again, we learned a little bit more about the Art Society's challenge from another article here, again by Derek Walcott, who was, you probably all know, was writing quite a bit about the Art Society at the time, and a number of works exhibited, etc. And it talking about the Art Society saying farewell to their French Street location. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they managed to hold on to it a bit longer, but they started losing bits and pieces of it as a school was built up around it. And they fought hard. And that's a bit about my story coming up at the Art Society on Wednesday night. And this artwork, again, was exhibited there. Again, Sybil was included in '62 in the design of the coat of arms and the national flag. And I found a beautiful document online, which I then got from a better quality copy of it from the National Archives. I found this in Sybil's collection of artifacts. And then I do know that Carlisle Chang was the one asked by the committee to do the final rendering of the coat of arms. But there was a whole committee, and you see a number of names in there, including architects like John Newell Lewis, and you have Mr. Bulbrook up there as well. You have Carlisle Chang's name there, right? You see George Bailey's name there, and then you see, oh, the ladies, Mrs. Sybil Atteck, Emmy Otley, Armstrong, and then Mr. Aladdin as the secretary. So again, Sybil, I don't know how much work she did on this. I know she was a very busy person at the time, but this was a committee that formed the national flag and the coat of arms. And so Sybil must have had something to say, I'm sure of it, in this regard. How much? I don't know. Independence time, they had an exhibition at the time, and Sybil's artwork was again included in the Independence exhibition. So that particular artwork has been seen a number of times in different exhibitions. She's then invited to go to Brazil, and I found the catalogs online from a Brazilian site with the artworks in Portuguese. Well, there's also a Trinidad version of the same catalog, and that particular one has Sybil's artwork, which is this piece. She then goes on to Naparima Bowl in 1963 and has another exhibition down in Naparima Bowl. And again, I have found a number of those artworks. And you'll see those artworks here. Again, this was exhibited down there. Again, a central bank piece was exhibited down there. She wasn't selling them. I mean, these paintings are sitting in her home, you know, having to cart them back and forth to different exhibitions and people not buying her works. Again, this piece was on exhibit there. Now here's another one, a Hussein festival, Hussein drums, very similar to the one that Central Bank has now, but this is in oil. She's done a number of them, which I know at least 2. But this one I haven't found yet. I don't know where it is. I think it's a pretty big piece because some photographs I have of Sybil show it in the background. It's really large. In 1964, Sybil is in her last term as president of the Art Society. And the Art Society, I found, had an exhibition. And about 21 years of the Art Society. 21, and they had a retrospective component to the exhibition. So the Art Society members collected artworks from all the previous years of the Art Society. And so that particular year had a combination of historical exhibition artworks as well as the current cohort of artists' work for that particular November exhibition. And this was an interesting time period because this is the period where the Art Society is fighting for their life. They're fighting to keep their French Street location, even though they're supposed to lose it. They're holding on to it. The school's being built up all around them, and they're losing bits and pieces of the location all the time. And they're really, really trying to hold on to it or to get another place. And they're having negotiations with the city council. City council approves it. But then the government of Trinidad and Tobago says, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to approve that. So then they're back fighting for it. Eventually they get the piece of land where it is today. So this catalog is a very useful catalog. Why? Because it chronicles the life of the Art Society in the first 21 years of the Art Society. Sybil, as the president, writes a nice piece in the article there, and there's also a nice history of the formation of the Art Society, the first members, the first committee, and the objectives of the Art Society at the time, and the lists of the first presidents of the Art Society. And it goes through each individual year, has artistic examples as well as nice write-ups about the Art Society's founding. In 1956, Sybil goes off to Nassau in the Bahamas. Why is that? Well, because Esso, Standard Oil, invites Sybil to go there. Well, guess what? She takes 91 artworks with her. Esso is paying for it, by the way. So she took as many pieces as she could to sell up to Nassau. She had never exhibited Nassau in the Bahamas before. It's a solo exhibition for her. Once again, we have the catalog, and of course, we have the prices that she put on the artworks because she marked up this one with all her prices in there. Again, list of artworks, and I've managed to identify a good number of them. Not as many as some of the other exhibitions, but a good number of them. I want to show you just a couple. I'm looking at this piece, I'm seeing cubism in there all over the place. I'm not an art expert, okay? I'm looking at it saying, well, pretty cubist to me. What do you think the subject is? I struggled with this for the longest while until somebody mentioned it to me, and suddenly I woke up. There's actually 2 pieces, this one and this one. Probably done at the same time. I'm looking at him saying, what is the subject of this artwork? Any guesses? If I told you that that circle there was a steel pan, come back and look at this piece again. You see a steel band in there? Took me a long time to see that. It's called Evening. It was actually listed in the catalog as Evening. So what does it mean? An evening with music, I guess. Now, this one, I don't know the title of it. There was another piece called Composition. I think it's probably, these two were probably done at pretty much the same time, side by side. Here's a couple of other artworks I found. Very interesting pieces. Again, I have not found them. They had, Sybil had pictures of these artworks. Again, I'd love to find these artworks. Here's another one. Large pieces, I'm sure. This particular artwork of Carnival is included there, and I'll come back and talk about this a little bit later on. There's another artwork I found very interesting, Nina. So I heard stories that Nina Squires, Nina Lamming, she's still alive, but she's getting really, really old now and is infirm at the moment. I've tried to reach out to her daughter, but she purchased, or she obtained this, maybe it was a gift from Sybil of Nina. It's basically from a news catalog from a magazine. Again, I'd like to find that original. I found these photographs in Sybil's collection, and I've seen images of it in newspaper articles of Sybil in Nassau with her artworks. There are a number of articles. Now then, I found this photograph of Sybil, and I'm saying, what artwork is that in the background? Well, if I look at the various little pieces of it, and I come back and take a look at this artwork, what do you see? See the two little bulbs on the right there? Oh, they're hidden. There's this little V here and so on. So this artwork was also exhibited in Nassau in the Bahamas. Again, this article was about Sybil. I didn't know where exactly in the Bahamas it was, but it was at the Royal Victoria Hotel in Nassau. Another picture from another newspaper article. And I also have dates that she left, January 13. A 2-week exhibition, so now I know the times, the dates. Again, another article which showed this particular piece. Once again, it's this piece from the central bank. So it gives you a sense of where and how many times Sybil exhibited the same artworks. Then I found a newspaper article from that time period. So while she was in Nassau, she's there with the University of West Indies extramural department, and she's giving a lecture on modern painting techniques in Nassau. And she did this several times. In 1963, she was in St. Lucia and Barbados giving lectures with exhibitions, solo exhibitions in both countries, both islands at that time, and talking to artists, helping them to understand art. Last artistic period, semi-abstract art, expressionist. So in 1967, Sybil decides she has to change up her art. She wants something fresh, something new. So she goes off to Provincetown in Cape Cod to the artist colony to get some inspiration from the American artists at the time. And this changed her art dramatically as she came back. And she's also the time period when she switched over from oil painting to acrylic. She actually changed over to some type of acrylic about a year before, but after this period, almost all her art turned directly to acrylic art. So she stopped using oil after this period, which is another telltale sign for artworks when you find them as to what period they're from, depending on what particular art, what paint she was using. So again, there's another reference from a catalog that this particular exhibition was in the Mirror Building here in Port of Spain. And here's the catalog from the Art Society's 1967 exhibition. And I found it very interesting. There is my dad's name and my mother's name. So Helen and Philip were in the Art Society at the time. And why was that? Well, this was a time period when they were fighting hard. Sybil was trying to get money to build a structure in a new Federation Park facility. And there's lots of interesting articles about Sybil trying to raise funds along with her brother, Philip, and Helen contributing, trying to get money to help build that facility. She never saw it built in her lifetime. Again, artworks that I found from that particular exhibition. This one I found interesting, all right? It's a waterfall, fantasy, rocks. very different. A picture from Provincetown. Again, I only have this from a very low quality image from an exhibition. I found this one here in Port of Spain in 2020, and I looked at it and said, what is the title of this piece? Until I saw this title, Reflections. So I think this artwork is from that. But again, it is from that period of her sort of semi-abstract period when she came back from Provincetown. And she's moving more and more into abstract art. Again, another piece from that same time period. And one more piece again. Again, this is Carnival, right? Carnival fantasy. Or fusion, sorry. In 1969, Sybil has an exhibition. This is the time when she discovers that she has cancer for the first time. But she's having an exhibition at Royal Bank, and she's also building her house in Valsine at the time. So she needs money to pay for two things, the house being built and to pay for her operation. Here's a catalog from that exhibition. And this is one beautiful exhibition that I can show you of Sybil actually in the exhibition hall with her paintings. And I found a whole series of photographs from this particular exhibition that show me. So now I have a catalog with names, and then I have a bunch of photographs, and now I'm trying to match names with photographs from the images, trying to figure them out. Of course, now she's in very abstract period, so it becomes a very, very difficult time to try and put the two together. Like, what's the title of this one? A couple more pieces. This particular art was purchased by the bank at that time. Three very nice Carney Swamp paintings. It was around this time that she was commissioned, or a little bit after this, to do an artwork for the government house by Thelma Hochoy, Lady Hochoy. So she has one piece in there, and I still haven't been able to get in to photograph it. Again, a couple of very abstract pieces, trying to find the title of these. A couple more abstract pieces. The one on the left went to Brazil with one of the exhibitions with that Sybil sent down there. Now this particular artwork is very interesting. There's two pieces there, another piece that's a sort of carnival piece, and then another piece there with this cart. And that cart and that piece are in this newspaper article. That helped me date the photographs, because when I found the photographs, I had no idea what date or what exhibition they were from. It was this article that I found that actually helped me to be able to figure out the fact that those photographs belong to this particular exhibition. And in this particular exhibition, the person writing about Sybil is talking about Sybil's serene and dreamy world, and her art and paintings reflect strong her experience in Provincetown. So again, her art evolved and changed, and here they're relating that fact in this particular exhibition. She's invited to represent Trinidad and Tobago by the government of Brazil. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago selected Sybil to represent, because they were coming into an agreement with the government of Brazil. And so Sybil was the one selected to represent Trinidad and Tobago. What's interesting about this particular exhibition is every single painting on this exhibition was painted specifically for that exhibition. And she is expressing what it is she expects to paint. Okay, she's going to paint the sea, the sun, the swamp, the folk dances, carnival, and a forest. And so even though she's just gone through her first operation for cancer, she's not feeling all that well, but she's convinced by a doctor to be able to go and do this, and she's now painting all fresh new artworks just for Brazil. And here she is in her studio with the artworks. Another one in there. So again, I had this photograph and I couldn't quite picture it. And I go back to this photograph and now it all makes sense. She's wearing the same top. I know what this is all about. Here's a picture, a newspaper article about Sybil receiving the money just before she travels to Brazil, some support money to help her to travel around Brazil. We found the photograph of this particular one. We also have the listing of the artworks and the crates that were in So we know what size they were because all the artworks in each crate were the same size. My mother knows because she was the one helping pack it. And Helen went with Sybil to Brazil on this particular tour. So she escorted her because she needed help traveling. So once again, there's a catalog. Guess where I found the catalog? I went Googling and I found it on a auction house in Brazil, in Portuguese. But I couldn't buy it because it wouldn't sell to anyone else but Brazilians. So I got a friend of mine in Brazil to buy it for me. And she actually signed this one. So I have an autographed catalog from Sybil that I managed to rescue out of Brazil. Again, she had a price listing on her artworks. And these are the artworks that were there in Brazil, painted specifically. This is the one from the Central Bank collection here. Beautiful lobster that she painted. My cousin has this in Toronto. Stick fighting. Oyster pickers. Caroni Swamp. Here is a beautiful picture of a sunset. This was only in the black and white photographs, but I did find this one my cousin has in Spain. Another shop scene that Sybil painted. Again, the Central Bank piece. So again, she's trying to sell these works and they're just not selling, right? This one you've probably seen. Mark Pereira had this piece. Here's a different painting, very different. Sails. Again, piece of the Central Bank, painted specifically for the trip to Brazil. Painting of Althea McNish. This one is right now on exhibit at the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester in England. They purchased this artwork and they brought the Althea McNish exhibition out of London to their exhibition, their own gallery, and it's been exhibited there as well. And this was also included in a BBC4 short, talking about new artworks acquired by the exhibition house. Another piece, Bird's Nest, a beautiful piece. Interesting color combinations, textures. Again, this was the piece that I showed you earlier that was in the bank. Hummingbirds. Boats and nets. So she painted a lot of different types of art, flora, fauna, as well as, scenery in Trinidad. Now she's in a very abstract, semi-abstract, abstract period. This one you think you've seen before. There's another painting just like this one. It's more bluish that was on the stamp for the 50th anniversary of the Art Society. And I found a photograph of this one. They look similar, but they're different, but the color scheme on this one is different. And this color scheme matches with the color scheme that she used in Brazil. The Caroni Swamp piece. The inspiration for my only painting I ever did in school that actually won a prize. And when Nan Richards put the star on it, she had no idea who painted it until somebody told her afterwards. It says, that's an Atteck. But that's from grade school. A beautiful black and white. I only have this from a photograph, but every time I look at this piece, I love looking at it. Again, black and white image. I'm not sure of the color. Again, the photograph is pretty much black and white. There might be more color in it, but it's a beautiful piece. Here are pictures of Sybil at her exhibition in Sao Paulo. So again, I'm looking at the photographs, I'm looking at the artworks in the background, saying, which ones were there in this exhibition, and I have proof of it from that. 1970, she goes to St. Catharines as part of twinning. The twinning was founded by my father, Philip Atteck, and Sybil was included in that. Of course, they took charter planes up, so she had an opportunity to take artworks up without having to pay for it. And so she had two exhibitions, solo exhibitions, one at Brock University and one in Niagara Lake. And that's when these photographs were taken of Sybil in 1970. Again, I've reproduced Brock University's exhibition. Again, this particular artwork was exhibited there. So again, you see, it's coming up again and again, and it's not sold yet. A beautiful piece. Once again, from Brazil, goes up to Brock University. Here is Sybil sketching, a beautiful picture of her sketching in front of the town clock in Niagara-on-the-Lake. She's hosted by these two ladies to stay there in St. Catharines. She's included in a parade of the Grape and Wine Festival. 1971, she is asked to participate in the role of women in the Caribbean development to do the cover of their report. Sybil has done a number of these types of things, representing studies on women, or in 1958, instead of going to the Federation of West Indies exhibition that was held for the commemoration of the founding of the Federation, she went off to Greece to participate as a Trinidad and Tobago representative of the YWCA International Conference. Interesting. She's also very much involved with women's clubs. And here's one is the Sir Optimus Club. Again, in 2020, I found this. She did the pendant design for the Sir Optimus Club. I found this in her collection as well, probably a design for a cover for some kind of a booklet or something. It's nicely signed by Sybil as well. We have about 10 or 20 of these pieces. Another beautiful piece of Sybil's work. This one is very, very different. This one now has things stuck to it with colors painted over it. And even the frame is painted. Again, a completely different design of Sybil's work. Again, this is the later period. Another piece, similar concept, a little bit different design. And around this time, there is a competition to try and get a design for a stamp for the new textile dish. And Sybil did a number of these types of artworks for that. Now you'll see her design has now changed into very abstract work. She's trying out black and white as well. She's got, now, she all of a sudden goes back to flowers. And these ones are dated. They actually have the date of 1971 on it. Beautiful balisé, yellow heliconia. I found those here in Trinidad in 2020. In 72, she's now got, again, interesting abstract art designs, very different than what she's ever painted before. Another piece. Very unique pieces, very different for her. And here we suddenly see this particular piece that the central bank has. Then I go off to Spain and I find this one, and it's dated as well. So even though she's gone off into this abstract world, she's still drawn back into this style of painting. This one as well, I found here in Trinidad. Another piece with the Caroni Swamp. In conclusion, I've pulled together over 700 of her artworks into a database. It helps me with the provenance of the artworks. All the research is in Zotero for all my citations. And I've written 3 different volumes. One is about the project itself to help other people doing projects of a similar nature. One is telling the story of the Atteck family, and the other one is Sybil's biography project. So she is, and I believe to be, a great woman artist. She's made a big contribution, and she's painted extremely good quality artworks that are, I think, representative not only of Trinidad, but for all of Europe and other places in the Americas. Least documented artist that I know of up till now, and I think I've done as much as I can for now on developing work on her, and I'm still looking for information about her. She's a leader who forged a path for the art movement in Trinidad and Tobago and for others to follow. She was the inspiration for founding the Art Society in 1943, and she led and guided the Art Society and the art community of Trinidad and Tobago and the British Caribbean through the period of decolonization into a nation of independence. She played an instrumental role also, I believe, in the design of the national symbols. She's recognized nationally and internationally as a leading woman artist. With one article that said that she was also a Grand Master, was an interesting one by one of the other artists at the time. First, I think one of the first locally born, well-trained art teachers in Trinidad. I know there are others who also got trained overseas, but I think she was amongst the first. She nurtured a lot of other artists and art capabilities here in Trinidad and Tobago during her lifetime, pre-independence, post-independence. And for these accomplishments, she received the Chicone Medal Gold in 1973. So I contacted a publisher who published a recent book called Great Women Painters, and I asked about how she got included. Well, they said they went through a list of several thousand artists from around the world. She made the short list somehow. The final selection of over 300 painters from 60 countries spanning 5 centuries. And they said it's art that they'd never seen anything like hers before amongst all these women painters. And when they read about her being sort of the founding mother of modern art in Trinidad and Tobago, they said, this is very interesting. We should include this person. And they read the article, and the central bank, and Naima and I have worked together because she was putting together a database, and I helped update her database with some text. They actually saw this database and said, oh, this is interesting. I think they should include her in this particular book. So here is the book, the cover. Here's the artwork I showed you earlier on, which was included in it. Mark Pereira was the one who actually put me in touch with them because they contacted him first in order to get this artwork to display. And then I helped afterwards with the text that's in there in the book. And of course, this is where it talks about how many artists there were in this particular catalog. So Sybil is included now in this Great Women Artists or Great Women Painters book. And one more note I want to leave with you is that UNESCO World Art Day each year is on April the 15th. It turns out that Sybil died on April the 15th. It's an interesting coincidence of dates. And if someone would be nice enough to consider Sybil as a great woman painter that they would like to represent the nation, I think it would be symbolic, if anything, to have some kind of an art activity, a competition, or something to celebrate UNESCO World Art Day, but also to celebrate the life and times of Sybil Atteck. So that's for me. Thank you very much for listening to me. I know I talked too long.
So much, Keith. Well, I think I'm mic'd. I don't need to. Okay, thank you so much, Keith. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I would now like to welcome to the stage Mr. Ken Critchlow. Mr. Critchlow is a practicing artist and currently the chair of the National Museum and Art Gallery. And we will have a Q&A.
Oops. Sorry about that.
So we'll have a brief Q&A. There are mics in the aisle that you would be free to use. But just before we start, I just want to ask Mr. Critchlow any opening comments about what we just heard and from your experience as an artist as well.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Keith, for this enlightening lecture. I would also like to thank you for sending me some time ago those 700 pictures of that you have collected in a database of Sybil's work. It has given me an insight into her working process and her procedures. So I would like to say just a few words about her practice as an artist. Sometimes we are overwhelmed by the narrative of people's life experiences and so on, the influences that have impacted on their practice. But very often, we don't spend enough time looking at the ways in which the technique, the ways in which their thoughts have become manifest in the ways in which they have worked. Sybil's work could really be broken down into like 3 big sections. They're not exclusive, because there are overlaps and things like that. But the first section that deals with her practice as a botanical artist, her search through London and in Peru, and again with Max Beckmann, you begin to see these are the 3 big influences in her work. And they begin to establish her as a modern artist. When we talk about a modern artist, we're not talking only about a modern artist in terms of the time. We're talking about a modern artist in terms of a way of seeing and thinking about the world. And the modern artists are artists that grew up at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, who began to see the world not as the academicians of the 19th and 18th century in Europe. They grew up outside of that tradition. So if you think about people like Picasso and Van Gogh and those people, they didn't grow up and their practice didn't develop within the academy. It grew up outside of the academy. And it is interesting to see that in the colony of Trinidad and Tobago, an artist taking influences and inspiration from these outsiders and bringing it forward. And Sybil wasn't the only one. You can go back to Émile Youngpan, you could go back to artists like the Stallmeyers and so on, who also functioned within this. It tells us something very important. I don't want to go on too long, I'm sorry. It tells us something very important. It tells us something about the mindset of Trinidadians and artists at the time, and the ways in which that has driven Sybil, so that her work begins and matures in the 50s and into the 60s, absorbing all of the cultural influences in Trinidad. So there's stickmen and panmen and carnival and all of the manifestations of life in Trinidad is there. And then she goes to Provincetown later on at the after Trinidad has achieved independence and after we have established concerns about our identity. She goes off and begins these personal explorations in her work, the abstractions that that she begins to embrace and develop and exhibit as she tries to become an international, true international painter in that sense. Okay, so sorry, I didn't want to be too long.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Critchlow.
Yes.
And well, I would like now to invite anyone from the audience. There are mics in the aisles. You can say your name, and if you have a question for Mr. Atteck or for Mr. Critchlow. I am not sure if Mr. Harry Dial is still here, but you always mention, Keith, that Atteck is considered the mother of art in Trinidad and Tobago, but I didn't know where it came from. And I saw on the slide that it was actually MP Aladdin who said that, and his nephew was here earlier. I know he said he had to leave, so he's probably not here anymore, but his nephew, who is also trying his best to record his father, his uncle's life story, was here earlier today, so that was really interesting. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
I left you speechless.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think we
you.
have a question.
Hi, good evening to the panel. I have a question. Keith, you mentioned about her starting off with oil, and then in the second phase that you spoke about, you talked about acrylics. But a couple of the articles that you actually showed in the slides talked about watercolors. So I was wondering where that fit into the timeline that you have of her artistic journey.
Yes, so the watercolors was from a very, very early period where she started. I mean, a lot of young artists start with watercolors. It takes a lot of effort to move from watercolors to oil. From what I understand, it's a much difficult technique. I know that people like Edwin Hingwan really excelled at watercolors and struggled with oil. I'm not an artist per se. I've heard these stories. But once acrylic paints became available, only in the periods of the mid-60s, people like Carlisle Chang and Sybil were trying to figure out, how do we use these paints? Why? Because oil paints take a long time to dry, and acrylic paints dry very quickly. So that was really the only way that Sybil could get all those artworks painted for Brazil in time and be dry enough that she could actually take them there. So early works in watercolor, experimenting in oil. She goes to Washington University and she actually studies oil painting. And when she returns to Trinidad in 1948, she's pretty much the only expert oil painter, well-trained oil painter in Trinidad. And for that matter, you can see in all the Art Society catalog periods from that period, she's teaching oil painting at the Art Society year after year after year. And most of the artists that moved to oil painting at the time all got their training, I think, from Sybil. Thank you for the question.
It's also important to know that acrylic paint out of the polymer base became popular in the period 1970s. The polymer-based paints, or the plastic-based paints, a lot of people don't want to call it. And artists internationally were using this new medium. And as part of the old progressive thinking that characterized Sybil's work, you know, you're reaching out to new materials and new ways of working. It's a process that continues even into today's practice.
And I would say that you probably would find the same transition between Carlisle Chang and Sybil at the same time, going from oil towards acrylic.
Yes. Everybody wanted to be up to date, you see, and the acrylic was an up-to-date, new up-to-date medium working.
So that's like AI now.
Very much so.
Yes.
So any other questions or comments from the audience? Yes.
Hi, I'm Stephen.
Hello.
Well, first I have a comment to say that I'm glad that you're not an investigator here, or I feel like a lot of us would be in trouble. You bang everybody. But one question I have for you, throughout this whole journey, kind of looking into her life and seeing how her art's evolved over time, what particular moment, this aha moment, did you feel when you kind of started the process and got you hooked on wanting to find every other piece along the way?
Thank you for the question. There was not one aha moment. There were so many aha moments. It happened time and time again. It didn't happen continuously, but there were so many things. You know, when you find an artifact, like a photograph or even a painting or whatever, you don't know its context. And it takes a lot of digging. And I'm going to talk about this a bit more in detail at the at the university lecture on Wednesday. You know, I have a photograph of Sybil standing next to another person who is Chinese in front of some kind of a monument. I know she looks pretty young. I don't know the year. I don't know the place. And I'm trying to figure it out. And so what I do, I start Googling all these types of monuments. I'm looking at these pictures, trying to figure out which one it is, until suddenly I come across a picture after searching for maybe a week or so of Grant's tomb in New York. Oh, that's Grant's tomb. Oh, when was she in New York? And then I get her, so that was the first aha moment. I now know where. And the next aha moment is I contact the Washington University and I ask for her transcripts. And after negotiating with them, proving that she died and I can family member, et cetera, I can get that information. Not they wouldn't give it to just anybody. I get that. And it says she did summer school in 1946 in New York City at Columbia University. So not only did she go to Washington University, but she did a summer school course at Columbia University to pick up those philosophy and other courses she had to do to get her degree. And those were two aha moments, both for the place, the date. Oh, and the third one was, who is the guy in the picture? And doing work on the genealogy side, I figured out, oh, that's Arthur Young. That was her cousin, who actually lived in New York City and was at Columbia University at that time. So those three things connected together, three kind of aha moments just on one photograph.
But I'd like to add to that. In the 1950s, or beginning in the 1920s, but her coming to maturity really as an artist in the 1950s. Trinidad, Port of Spain in particular, was a ferment, a bubbling cultural heartland. You had the steel band began, you had Olive Walk was researching the music of the various cultures in Trinidad and forming it into a choir. Bosco Holder was, and Beryl McBurney were very active in the cultural environment. Trinidad was such an alive at that moment. It's such an alive moment in time. The politics of the society was also driving towards getting rid of the colonial ethos, not just the colonial government, but the ethos of being a subject people. People were trying to figure out and say, look, we are Trini, we are, and we have a culture, we have an identity that is honorable. And if you go back to a lot of the calypsos, or listen even to a lot of the commentary, there was a picture of Edric Connor and his landmark speech of 1943 that puts all of these ideas together, so that the aha moment really wasn't only as a personal psychological moment or series of moments. It was also the milieu, the space, the context within which she was trying to practice as an artist.
Yeah, and that whole thing about Edric Connor, I didn't know who Edric Connor was. I saw this picture, I see the name Edric Connor, and to me, for about a year or so, I said, a nice guy looking at Sybil's painting. Until just recently, I participated in a little webinar, and they were talking about this new book on Edric Connor. And they talked about the fact that he was in 1943 talking about folklore and so on. And oh, so that's who Edric Connor was. Yeah. And so I got a copy of that book, and I read through it. And I knew what Sybil was doing. And there's actually some newspaper articles of Sybil at so many events in Port of Spain in exactly that time period, trying to push this art society. I wouldn't be surprised if Sybil was at the same place at the Princess Building where he gave his second lecture, because all the people in society were there at that time. And Sybil was very active in Port of Spain then. She must have been there, I think. Getting, first of all, her first introduction, I think, probably to the folk dances and music of Trinidad and being explained about that.
Yeah. And I'm sure with more probing, you would find more connections with other artists around that period, because as far as I know, Sybil's project is, far gone when you look at biographies that have been done of other artists of that era. Okay.
I think the chart that you showed of that Kyla Chan created, that tried to make a graphic of the artist, I think provides a very useful introduction to try to explore and understand the time and the way in which people work. It tells us that we have a lot of work to do still.
Yes. So I know we've gone a bit over time, so maybe if we have one more question, we can take it and then we could wrap up.
I'm David Boothman, and I just want to add to your story because on 2 events, Hans Guggenheim stayed at our house when he came to, and I hung out with him. I was like 12.
Wow.
Nice.
And going back to what Ken was saying, the 50s played a really, Trinidad was the place where most of the researchers came to Trinidad, the Crowleys and stuff. And the Art Society, I remember running through the Art Society as a kid and being addicted to turpentine. That's the sense you get in the Art Society. And the quality of paint, as you said, the oils. What I realized too, some of the works crack because we're still working with how you blend the turpentine with the oils and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, so I think in the 60s, there were, the technology of understanding what that was came up with the artists around. But the work of Sybil was so awesome because I was around there. Also, Frida McBurney was around there, and they were good friends. So I just want to thank you because this information is so rich. Our young people need this information. This should be in movies, it should be documented, and hopefully we could get Greg Jones to play the part.
Okay.
I don't know, I mean, we need to do these kind of things because we listen stories, true stories, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. I know we had a shorter Q&A than we planned because, Keith, there's just so much that you could have said. You had to cut
and I cut so much out of this. It isn't funny.
But we really appreciate the work that we're doing. And of course, I know that everyone is here because they understand the importance of legacy and the importance of preserving our art and our history. And I know that this is going to end the way you would want it to end, with a publication, maybe a film, and that Sybil's life will live on and her legacy will live on for generations to come. So thank you everyone for coming. You will get to speak with Keith afterwards. You can have some coffee and just relax. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
Just before you go, just want to say that book, you're going to bring her up still?
Yeah, so I just Christine, you could come. Yeah.
Everyone. Woo.
It's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Nanton-Winter, Assistant Manager, External Relations here at the Central Bank. I have oversight of our art spaces, so our auditorium as well as our museum. And I mean, just to echo Naima's sentiments, we're really grateful to have Keith here and the Atteck family. This evening was really a celebration of not just Sybil's life, but also her legacy. And so we're really happy to be part of this, to create the space for this. So thank all of you for joining us this evening. I know that before we close, Keith wanted to just make some presentations, so
Yes.
you can have a moment to do so now.
Just give me a moment. I'm just going to reach there. I purchased 2 copies of the book that just came out, and I'd like to present 1 copy to Naima
Thank
for
you.
the Central Bank,
Thank you.
and 1 copy to Ken as well.
Thank
for
you
the
very
Central
much.
Bank. So it's the celebration of Sybil's life. She's now recognized internationally in a major publication.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. As Naima mentioned, you can have a coffee outside. We have a little time again to allow for some mingling, but do get home safely. Thanks.